Gemini AI products require 0.24 watt hours of electricity, which is roughly equivalent to 1 second of a microwave usage, or 9 seconds of TV, 5 drops of water, blah, blah, blah. But what they're basically trying to say is that a single Gemini text prompt consumes in energy, carbon, and water. On paper, this is very small. In practice, though, it's a huge leap in efficiency. It's 33 times more efficient and 44 times lower carbon impact in just 1 year since where they were last year.
The big news, if we were to do one thing, stop handing money to foreign-based multinationals that are competing against us. So the good news is at least we're starting to learn the lesson that procurement is an economic tool, and I'm glad it's Cohere that's getting this, because a year or 2 years ago, that would have been a US-based LLM getting it, and we would be scratching our heads again and seeing our taxpayer money leak across the border.
All right, John, welcome back to the tank here. Lots of headlines swirling around in Canada. The biggest headline that came out this week was obviously the announcement and the confirmation from David Ossip's acquisition of his company, Dayforce, by leading U.S. private equity firm Thoma Bravo for $70 a share, valuing the company at $12.3 billion US, 32% premium since its unaffected share price. And for those who don't know much about David Ossip and the team there, Dayforce was Ceridian's flagship product. A company was founded in 2009 by David Ossip through acquisitions in 2012. It became one of the larger offerings of payroll, HR benefits, talent, and workforce management solutions all in one single platform. They rebranded to Dayforce in 2024, and it's got over 9,500 employees, 7,000 customers, including the government of Canada, and 1,500 staff in Canada. Pretty impressive. Biggest acquisition, private acquisition, I believe, for a tech company in Canada that I've heard. Yeah, I don't think there's been a bigger private takeover by a Canadian tech company. So, John, I mean, what does this say about more interest from the private equity guys taking, a big public company private at this price? What's the evolving private equity landscape look like when you've got these types of buyers out there targeting a Canadian enterprise SaaS company? And, how do you think about Dayforce going private, where the peak of its share price was a lot higher, obviously during the run up in COVID, but still a very healthy takeout. What does this say about sort of the reasons why a company like this decided to go private instead of staying public?
Well, yeah, I mean, I haven't spoken to David on that, but I certainly believe that David believes that they can grow bigger, better, and faster in a private context. And I remember that just taking back to history, David formed a startup called Dayforce. And I remember him, and I asked him, "So what are you doing here? Like, what's your goal?" And he goes, "My goal is to do an RTO, a reverse takeover of Ceridian." And I'm like, "Dude, Ceridian's like the global market leader." And he's like, "You watch." And the guy did it, number one. So it's like huge, like unbelievable. Now, but remember, the way that it was done, it always was technically a US based company.
Correct. Yep.
But Mind and Management was here in Toronto. So even though it was always US, it was operated by Canadians, which was, wonderful. I guess the question that I do have is, this is the vulnerability where you have massive amount of capital in the United States looking for deals. And does this privatization actually impact on that management, central management and control location? And does that enable the migration of Mind and Management actually to the United States, which would be, sad. But, David, at the end of the day, has to do whatever it takes to maximize his shareholder value and his path for growth. But that's the big question I had in my mind when I saw this deal.
Yeah, and it follows other Canadian examples of companies that are going private through acquisitions with big U.S. private equity firms. We had the Magnet Forensics, also taken private by Thoma Bravo, Nuvei, Copperleaf, SoftChoice. I guess the question is, if you're a mid-teens, low 20s grower in a enterprise SaaS world, and you're public, are you better off being private,
Probably.
where the public markets are clamoring for, crypto, AI, consumer startups, things like that, and they're not going to give the same attention to companies like this. I think that has to play in sort of the trend
Yeah.
that we're seeing in how B2B SaaS companies are being valued, right?
Yeah. And by the way, there is massive dry powder in these very large private equity firms. And the problem is there too. They're under the pressure to deploy as well.
They have a time crunch.
Right. And so they're doing that. And exactly what you've just said is it's continues to hollow out the public markets.
Hmm.
So, you know, is this a good or bad thing in the long run? I mean, time's going to only tell, but it is. I'll tell you from a Canadian perspective, because those massive capital pools are not in Canada, it's probably a bad thing for Canadian based large
Hmm.
businesses or public ones.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, the industry trend for HR software was not that great just a few years
Yeah,
ago, but there's more consolidation. Paycheck acquired by Paycor for 4.2 billion this year. ADP bought Workforce Software for 1.2 billion. And Dayforce is competing with a couple private companies as well, like Rippling and Gusto.
right.
So it's an interesting trend that we're
Deal.
seeing here. Did you see also that Canva was doing a tender
I saw
offer
that.
for their company? $42 billion valuation, oversubscribed supply demand, I mean, for a employee tender offer being led by JP Morgan. Seeing tender offers for companies that are apparently, doing, I think they said it was around 3
Yeah.
billion, 3.5 billion of 3.3 billion of ARR. It's not that expensive for a company, at that size. I would have thought if Figma's going out, at the price they're going 50x, their revenues on the IPO, doesn't seem that crazy for Canada to go out at 42 billion for a
Yeah.
3.3 billion dollar run
Well,
rate.
let me ask you the question, Matt. How enthusiastic are you still with the latest Chat GPT 5 and its capabilities? And man, I've been playing around with it, and Jesus, I'm getting a little surprised on how elegant it is.
No, I don't know about the ChatGPT 5 concern. I think what is crazy what our companies' bills were on a monthly basis to OpenAI
Did
and
you
how
see
much they're
that?
going down.
I
Yeah.
know.
So they were getting away with like a 4x cost
I
arbitrage
know.
for what they were charging on a token versus some of their competitors.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, people are only going to choose by maybe some onshore ones, so they're not going to choose the Chinese ones. But I was speaking to some of our companies this week, and they were telling us that their bills with OpenAI were like 20, 25,000 a month.
Correct. Correct. Yes.
That's AWS charges right there. So that could go down. And we talked about this,
Yeah.
you and I offline. It could go both ways. But speaking of AI, we've got Toronto-based AI startup back in the news, Cohere, signing two big announcements in the last week. One was a non-binding MOU with the Canadian federal government to explore deploying its AI technology across the public sector, while also securing the rumored, well-anticipated $500 million US round of funding at a $6.8 billion valuation. So which one do you want to tackle first? The last equity round led by Radical and Inovia, or the MOU announced by Minister Evan Solomon?
Well, I think the really big news is after governments keeping on saying that, yeah, procurement is important, blah, 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 blah. Not only did you see the Cohere news, but you also saw Ranovis on the Ontario government. We are like the big news. If we were to do one thing, stop handing money to foreign based multinationals that are competing against us. So the good news is at least we're starting to learn the lesson that procurement is an economic tool, and I'm glad it's Cohere that's getting this, because a year or 2 years ago that would have been a US based LLM getting it, and we would be scratching our heads again and seeing our taxpayer money leak across the border.
I'm just excited to see some type of productivity gains coming out of the Canadian government for once in our goddamn lives. I mean, we're talking about so long that we've been talking about automation of summaries from Parliament, which we have companies doing this
Yeah,
already. Page does this already. We need to see more of this. Obviously, they got a lot of support from other Canadian investors like Hoop and PSP, along with private equity or venture firms in the US, Salesforce Ventures, NVIDIA, AMD as well. The business, is growing, which is great. Cohere recently surpassed 100 million in ARR and expects to double to $200 million by year end, but still trails its obviously big rivals like OpenAI and Anthropic. It employs 450 people, definitely works with a large contingent of the Canadian, big name companies like Bell and,
RBC.
RBC and things like that. I think it's the right approach for them to play the enterprise secure custom agent features for on-prem deployment game.
Yeah.
And I think this is a great direction for the Canadian government, but let's hopefully see some
Yeah.
actual results from it
Yeah.
in the near short
Exactly.
term.
I really do wish them the greatest success.
Yeah. So we talked about the cost of AI. Obviously, companies are raising money because maybe they're subsidizing a lot of the usage of it. But model costs have been dropping sharply, John, in recent years. They've basically plateaued over the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Driving up expenses for buyers while boosting revenues for big players like Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. So what are your thoughts here with token prices for top models in OpenAI, Anthropic, and others basically falling, in certain ways? Where do you think this lands here? Because this is where a lot of people are starting to say, what is the full business model look like at a normalized run rate?
Yeah. I mean, right now, where is the money being made? It's 100% on picks and shovels, right? So it's the plumbing. And when I say plumbing, it's Nvidia, it's the data center providers, et
Yep.
cetera. And I say to some extent the LLMs because their models are not profitable yet. You and I have talked about this. The infrastructure layer, which is always the first layer, will commoditize and it will end up in a rule of three. It's all shaping out exactly what you and I said for the last couple of years. Now, the question and where the economics will accrete is at the application layer ultimately. What is interesting? And as you know, you and I see thousands of application layers and there's still so much volatility. Their unit economics are not generally very good because they have to pay for huge compute costs. Now, what the LLMs are doing though, and I'd say OpenAI is probably doing it the most effective. They understand that and they're verticalizing the full chain from the infrastructure layer to the middleware operating layer to the application layer and using their own agentic AI because I think they believe that's where it's going to accrete to. So the interesting development is the application layer folks will have to likely compete against the LLM layer, which perhaps they didn't expect, a while ago. And the question will be, is there going to be general application layer with some general large players that cover kind of the fat part of the market, and then all of these niche ones, like a Blue Jay Legal. I use that as an example and a Canadian example. Their advantage right now, even though they're using similar LLM training data, they're going so niche. And with that niche, the speed and the ability to tailor those response has an advantage today. Now, will that advantage sustain in the future? I don't know. But so I'm seeing the niche, there are niche players versus the general, and it'll be interesting to see how this continues to unfold.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Microsoft saw a huge jump in their revenues off it as the
Yeah,
provider, is what you're
the
talking about,
Azure,
John. The
the cloud
provider.
computing. Yes, correct.
39%
Yeah,
jump in revenue for Azure last quarter, obviously
huge,
driven by the token usage.
huge number.
OpenAI's business says they crossed $1 billion in run rate finally, but they're still subsidizing their free ChatGPT use and obviously facing heavy losses due to their training cost. So I agree with you completely. Did you see the recent announcement from Google though? Google announced they're revealing their AI energy usage data. Basically, try to
Oh, I didn't see
extend.
that.
Yeah, it just came out recently, basically saying that the Gemini AI products require 0.24 watt hours of electricity, which is roughly equivalent to 1 second of a microwave usage, or 9 seconds of TV, 5 drops of water, blah, blah, blah. But what they're basically trying to say is that a single Gemini text prompt consumes in energy, carbon, and water. On paper, this is very small. In practice, though, it's a huge leap in efficiency. It's 33 times more efficient and 44 times lower carbon impact in just 1 year since where they were last year. So who knows how much this is going to actually trickle through. Now, this is just the median
Yeah.
usage, but all the concerns around how much of a carbon footprint and energy consumption this is training is feeling like it might start a
Yeah.
plateauing, maybe.
Well, and I guess Matt, again, I'm going to go and dig that out, but you're also not running your dishwasher 24/7, right? So this
Some
thing,
people are.
if they're well, some people might be, but if you're computing that calculation based on a 24/7, that might be a very misnomer on the consumption. Because when I look at it on a macro basis, and then I'm seeing the energy needs of the US in and of itself, it's like it's astronomical consumption that's required from an energy perspective, and they keep on talking about there's just not enough capacity right now. So
Yeah,
we'll
absolutely.
we'll we'll see what those numbers really are gonna
Yep.
be.
So, John, I gotta bring up crypto one more time here. China is weighing the approval of its yuan-backed stablecoins for the first time as part of a
Yes.
broader push to expand its yuan's global dominance. I said to you last time that the reason the U.S. is pushing for stablecoins is not because of the technology's benefits. Primarily, it's primarily to keep the U.S. as this global reserve
And
currency.
pay their
Now, the
debts. Yeah.
government is saying and pay their debts. Now, obviously, China wants to make sure that this is quite tightly held in terms of what they're releasing to the public, but it's obviously an aim to compete with the US's lead on stablecoin development. And they've got probably a little bit of pressure from some of their global companies headquartered in
Mhm.
China who want to start adopting and authorizing the use of stablecoins. You're talking
Yeah.
about JD.com, Ant Group, things like that. As the two biggest economies in the world are leading towards this, how have we not had any announcements from our government yet?
Well, I'm about to push the button on my thought leadership piece on exactly what Canada should be doing. And we better move really, really fast. This is the greatest risk to our financial sovereignty over monetary policy. And our banking system is at great risk on this. And the Chinese have realized that because the Chinese are massive users of crypto. And they're afraid that this will weaken the yuan currency and it will be this leak of capital out and to support the US dollar. So they have realized that, and I am trying to alert and put a red flag alert to all of our folks. We got to move right now on this because we're going to run into the boiling frog. And it's so obvious, it pains me that we're not moving.
Okay, fine. Make a prediction here, John. Do you think in 10 years there will be a Canadian dollar? Dollar. Or do you think there will be so much demand and access to US dollar stablecoins that it will almost be irrelevant for us to have a Canadian dollar?
You know, so that I'm not smart enough to figure that out. But uh, I hope that's not the answer because then we lose control of over our economy completely, our interest rate setting, etc. The one thing that we have is the massive amount of energy and resources, where when we trade those, particularly with non-US folks, we can be using that and denominating those purchases to be in Canadian dollars and use a Canadian stablecoin, not a government issued one, but a Canadian one that is supported by the private sector. I am very concerned that if we do not do this, that you're going to see our dollars, our Canadian dollars, slowly leak out into US dollar stable coins. And again, it's still early days on it, but I think other countries are going to produce their own. And the only reason why I think that's not an inevitability because under that same logic, before there was crypto, the Canadian dollar was still there and supported. And the other thing I got to say is as long as our banking system is strong enough that they can buy our Canadian uh, 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 T bills, we will be, I think, fine. There'll be enough demand. But if the deposits in our Canadian banks leak away, where is the capital going to come from in order to stabilize that demand? That's the flywheel that I'm very concerned about.
Okay, I'll give you my prediction. I think that the only reason there is a Canadian dollar is because of the FX fees and the process it takes to go through getting your business from Canadian dollars into US dollars. If you look at the facts, roughly $2.5 billion per day in US dollars is business done between Canada and the United States. It's roughly around $900 billion per year. A large majority, over 70% of the transactions done are priced in US dollars
Right.
between Canada and the US. So if you think about the actual transactions that happen in our economy, it's already being done in US dollars.
Right.
We just have an industry, mostly the banking industry, that has flourished off processing Canada to US dollar currencies as an FX business that allows us to do these cross border contracts. I think a stablecoin is actually a benefit to our economy and sucks out a fee machine and middlemen that we have obviously propped up because of the ways in which our dollar has been utilized internally. That's my belief. I'm going to say that in 10 years, 2035, we will have more people using US stablecoins than makes sense for us to continue to print Canadian dollars.
Wow. Well, and it's interesting. I hope you're dead wrong.
I know, me too.
I
Me
hope you're
too.
dead wrong, but I will tell you, if we don't do something, you will be right.
John, you talk about this in your recent writing post.
You'll
I
see it
want to make
right
sure we have
now.
time to
What
cover.
you just said is I am trying to wake up everybody because that's where we're headed. And again, I'm not smart enough or experienced enough in this area to understand how to fully architect it. But I will tell you that this is a core investment thesis for Mavericks. We will put our money where our mouth is on here. I'm just trying to figure out exactly how to make it play. But here is an area that you can't do it alone. It must be a team Canada working on together
Yep.
because it's a Canadian problem.
Well, let's just talk about it, John. You released a great post on August 20th entitled Chasing the Tornado, Why Canada's Future Can't Wait.
Yeah.
Basically making arguments around our renewed US tariff war, reminder we must prioritize our own economic sovereignty. And instead of waiting for political calm, we should chase the tornado and turn the disruption into opportunity. Can you give a sense to our listeners about sort of where you are trying to get Canadian founders and entrepreneurs to focus, and why, the capital players in this economy, like the pensions, the banks, the governments, and family offices, need to step up as well?
Yeah, I have no issue with the Canadian entrepreneurs. Like, there's plenty of them that have the right ambition, but the problem is these take capital, and we're trying, from our firm perspective, and I know a few others as well, but we need capital, and you know it's not sufficient where the capital providers are saying, well, we need guarantees. Well, hold on a minute. During 21 and 2022, you were deploying capital like it was on fire at prices that were egregious. And now that the prices have come way down and the opportunity sets are going up, but you're afraid, like, like shouldn't you be deploying the capital? In fact, by being conservative, are you not taking the greatest risk by hoping that let's just wait until the calm goes down? The opportunity sets are now. And, you know, it's, and I've had these discussions with some of the large capital pools, and I said, you know what? I'm no expert here, but when you buy high and sell low, you don't make money. And that's exactly what you're doing. So it's a wake up call that, and particularly, regulated industries or industries that rely on public policy for their creation and survival. Like, we need to come together as a team Canada. The entrepreneurs need it. And if they don't get it here, guess where they're going to go to get it? And they have
That's
to
it. It's
go.
great.
They
I
have
mean,
to go get it.
the core message was quite clear. Either wait and watch others win, hide and risk irrelevance, or chase the tornado, as you say, right? And invest in the sovereign businesses and secure our own destiny. It makes total sense. I hope people pay attention and listen to it, John, and they'll find it on your Substack. The last thing I got to ask you was, obviously, I saw your post about being the next Iron Man.
Oh.
Please tell our listeners what that was. You were walking in an exoskeleton built by Human in Motion Robotics, and tell us what it felt like, obviously.
Yeah, so so Human and Motion Robotics is based in Vancouver. spin out of professors out of Simon Fraser University. I've been chatting with them for about a year, and they've created a robotic um, exoskeleton for folks, particularly that have complete paralysis. In my case, I could move my legs. I could stand and I could walk in a treadmill, etc., holding on here. And I said, wouldn't it be great if you could adapt your technology using AI so it learns where do I need the help so that I could still walk, but you help me because I have one leg that's stronger than the other, for example.
Mhm.
And they came over to see me and my physiotherapist, and we spent 2 days uh, testing this thing out here. And so this is going to change the world for people like me who are suffering on this, but anybody with any mobility issues. And when this becomes far more compact, I imagine that, when I'm in my office here, I wear these to go walk to meeting. I take them off for a bit and sit in a chair and then put them right back on. And you're just starting to think of the possibilities. So it was great to do this. This is the first time since my accident that I actually walked independently, not tethered
Wow.
to something on here. And for those that have had the same misfortune as I did, it is a feeling of independence, albeit very, very small feeling. But this is a great example of this is technology in our own backyard. So they're looking to raise capital, more investors. And I said, let me test it. And it's impressive.
It's incredible to see. I mean, you look so comfortable, obviously, in there. Your hands were kind of walking
Yeah,
by your
yeah.
sides. It's a great example. Again, a Canadian company assisting with the rehabilitation and helping more people live everyday lives like you, John. This is amazing. I can't wait to get the name out, and hopefully more investors listening will check it out.
Awesome.
But as always, John,
All
thanks for
right.
jumping in
Thanks,
the
buddy.
tank.